So we're here in Sweden at the 2022 conference, the ICDF 2022 conference, and we have the founder of ICDF, Mary Jones, with us. And we'd like to unpack and hear from Mary just a little bit about the beginnings of ICDF. So Mary, what was it like in the beginning, just as you started the fellowship, as right at the start, right at the beginning, what was it like?
The beginning was in Australia in 1978, and that was the basis for 10 years later, the international emerging. I had been going around the world meeting people, and I was puzzled as to why it seemed to be difficult for other countries to start a Christian dance fellowship. I didn't know any dancers when I was in Australia. I had a calling to come into dance in my early 30s, and I went to a conference in education through the arts and started the Australian fellowship there. So to me, I wondered why it seemed to be difficult for other countries. So as I was traveling around and talking to people, we were planning a conference for Australia for our 10th anniversary, and it was also the bicentenary of Australia, so it was a bit special for us, and we wanted to invite people from all around the world, dancers primarily, to come and join us. And I had the idea that possibly at that conference there might be an opportunity to get people together, the internationals, and to see if they wanted to start an international fellowship. And my idea was that if we could do that, we could support one another in doing something similar that we'd done in Australia in other countries. And so I was inviting people as I went around. And my primary vision when I'd started the Australian Fellowship was to bring dancers from all styles, all ministries, all denominations to experience unity together. Different, all different, but to find that basic unity in Jesus Christ. And I thought that that could be an example to the church, and we could have, be a picture in that way of the fact that, yes, unity was possible through difference, including many, many differences. So our first, we had a logo. This was our Australian logo, and the idea was that we had a male and a female dancer and a cross. So just to show a worship dance against the cross, and both male and female, knowing it was much more difficult to get the males in than it was the females. So then at the 1988 conference, we called a meeting, and we had many, many interesting teachers from around the world, right around USA, Britain, Europe, South Africa, New Zealand, and a few other countries as well. And at the meeting, most of those countries were represented. And Randall Bain, who had been leading the Feast of Tabernacle dance team, at which I'd danced the previous year, and he was a good leader. And so when we discovered that, yes, we had a common interest in starting something, he took it upon himself to suggest that I should be the first coordinator. So that's what happened. We didn't have a constitution, but we did have the Australian constitution that we could base anything future on if we decided that that was appropriate. So at that conference, which was outside Sydney in the country, we began thinking about how we're going to start the international, and that we should have a conference to get people together. And so a friend of mine who'd prayed a lot with me said that she felt that the Lord was saying that it should be in Israel. And I thought about it and prayed about it, and I thought, yes, that's right. There's something very important about starting something in Israel. That is Jesus' own country. That is has the history of Judaism, of the Old Testament scriptures, and Miriam dancing, and David dancing before the Lord, and it seemed very appropriate. But when I mentioned it to Randall, who had run a lot of things in Israel, he said, no, too difficult. So I said, Randall, please pray about it. So Randall went away and prayed, and he came back and said, yes, it's the right thing. So in the next, we decided that the conference would be in 2 years from there. In the Australian conferences, we'd had them every 2 years, and we knew we'd need at least that to plan an international conference. And so New Zealand, South Africa, England, all were formed their own Christian dance fellowships in the first few years. And they would have an initial meeting, which was like an introductory meeting, gathering people together, and I would try to be at that. And then after that, they would form a committee and look at their constitution, and then there would be a second meeting where the constitution would be passed, and they would be an official Christian dance fellowship rather than in the beginning stages. And at the same time, we were thinking of constitution for the international dance fellowship. And I can remember going to the US, and Randall was on a trip down to do some ministry, and poor guy, the whole trip I was reading out the possible constitution for the international fellowship and asking him all these detailed questions. So not really fair on him as he was trying to get ready for a ministry situation. But we eventually came up with a constitution, and that would be passed when we were in Israel. So there was a lot of preparation to do for Israel. And I visited Israel. We set up at the YMCA. They were willing to have us. And again, we had to let people around the world know and put out a brochure, all these things, you know, for the first time. So my visits to Israel were very important, meeting people, and we had somebody in Israel who was willing to help with the logistics and setting it up, so that was very helpful. And then the YMCA said to me, how many are coming? We need to make plans because we have other people who are trying to make bookings. And I thought, I haven't got a clue. And at this stage, the Gulf War was going on, so nobody was very keen on coming to Israel. It was a bit too dangerous. So I just had to pray. And I said, Lord, how many are going to come? And I seemed to get the number 70. And 70 seemed a good number. You know, Jesus sent out the 70 into the villages to preach the kingdom of God. So I thought, all right, 70. So I said to the YMCA, we will have 70 coming. And lo and behold, that is what happened. We had just about a round number of 70 who came from all around the world and from Israel. There are a few who attended just day by day who are living in Israel. It was a wonderful time, very difficult to set up. It always is hard doing something in Israel because there's a lot of warfare that goes on. I don't think the devil likes Israel very much. And And we were doing everything for the first time. So when we were in Israel, one of the things that we wanted to do was to go round to all the gates in the old city. And so we had teams, country teams mostly, who would go to a gate and take their banners and sing and dance and wave banners at the gate, just praying for the entrance to the Lord. We had given the name of the conference, Preparing the Way, and that was something that the Lord seemed to be saying to us about part of this conference was to prepare the way for his coming. And so this is the t-shirt that we had and the logo that we worked out for the International Christian Dance Fellowship, again with the cross and the male and female dancer, and this time with the globe to show that it was international. And then because of the conference we had Preparing the Way, so that was a very significant time for us. Another important thing that we did was to take a prayer walk. So most of the conference came on this walk, and it was partly sightseeing, but the more important thing was to pray as we went. So we saw some of the important sites. We prayed at the Western Wall. That was very special. And then we also went into one of the churches. I think it was the Church of St. Anne, and we sang all together without any accompaniment. It was the most amazing sound I have ever heard. The beautiful acoustics in the church, and we sang in tongues or in English, and so all sorts of different tunes all going on at the same time, and it was just as if heaven had opened. Another thing that we did was to have a concert and include some of the local Israeli dancers, not all believers, and there was one dance in particular that I remember, Sarah in her tent laughing at the 3 men who had come to announce that she would have a baby in a year. And Sarai was already in her 80s or 90s or, some very advanced age, and she thought this was a big joke that she could still have a baby. But as we all know, that baby came within that year. And this dance was amazing because she had her tent with her, and by her movements, of course, she showed the humour of Sarai. And so that was one dance that really sticks out in my memory. And then, as well as having the concert and having classes every day, which were amazing, to meet people, to have teachers from all around the world, we then, post-conference, went on a wonderful tour together, a bus tour. We went all the way up to Galilee, and we did some filming up there of some dance by the lake, which was very special. And then we came all the way down to the desert, and came into the desert and got a feel for what it was like when Jesus went into the wilderness, and when John the Baptist was baptizing people at the Jordan and living in the desert. And we did a bit more filming down there. So some people stayed on to go to the Feast of Tabernacles, and then most of us went home. I remember Catherine from France had great difficulty. She got lost on the way or something, but I think we all eventually got home, which was good. And then, of course, the next step in the Dance Fellowship was to expand the number of countries. And we'd had people from Puerto Rico and the Bahamas, and so a greater selection of countries than we'd had at the 1988 conference. And so my next job as coordinator was to go around all these countries and to help them form dance fellowships. That was a great privilege to be able to do that and to get a feel for the countries, to keep correspondence with them. No internet in those days, so all by letter. It's hard to imagine that now. And usually I tried to be there at the first meeting and then to come back for the forming of the Constitution, as I mentioned before. And so soon we had many more countries that had joined. And we tried to have a conference every 3 years and to go to a different country every year. So that was important to give us a chance to meet up and to see one another after the break of 3 years.
So Mary, that's really so heartwarming. I was at the 1991 conference in Jerusalem, and it was just the most heartwarming memory and experience for me as a dancer to have been there. So since that time, and since you've progressed with the fellowship, what are the most significant developments that you've experienced with the fellowship?
I think it's been wonderful seeing the way that the different countries have developed, and the fact of getting together and having conferences, having workshops. So many more people have been included, and so many more churches understand now about the significance of and the importance of having dance as part of worship. Of course, there are still churches that don't feel that it's appropriate, but I think that we're making a little bit of a headway in encouraging churches to see that it is a biblical thing, and so not against the tradition of the church, but it's there from the very beginning. And I think the formation of groups, some of which have been within individual churches, others have been more widespread and have been able to travel. We've seen a great development in that, and that's been very encouraging. And then, of course, with social media and the changes with the internet, thank goodness we don't have to write everything by letter these days. It took a long time. I can remember inviting teachers. Every teacher had to have a letter, and of course we used the Roneo machine and the copier when that came in. So the very first newsletter that I made when the Australian Fellowship started, I used the machine at my church's office to run off stapled them together, sent them out with a stamp, so we don't have to do that anymore. And also because, of course, with COVID, we've developed a lot as well. And now we have a very comprehensive website, and so much can go on there to be available to the whole world in an easy way. Now, as far as other developments, we've been able, it was always my dream to have a diploma of some kind, that people would be able to learn how to be a dance minister. Maybe they're in the country and they didn't have the same resources, but they could learn something through email and progress to getting a diploma. And so it was very exciting in 2009 at the conference in Scotland, where we were able to start that diploma. And so we've had some graduates from that, and that's again, we have teachers now from around the world. They're not all in one place. And then the other thing that started in 2009 at the conference in Scotland was the ICDF Foundation. And so now through the foundation, we're able to receive donations and raise money to help people get to the conference, to give scholarships, and also to help people with projects in different parts of the world, so that we can provide money, encouragement, and other forms of help to enlarge the whole vision and project of ICDF. One of the important early developments was starting the networks. The idea of a network was that it would deal just with a special part. So it might be prayer, children, youth, men. So special interest, ballroom dance, whatever, all these different areas, that Israeli dance, things that people might be interested in and want to meet other people who also specialized in that. And so we appointed network leaders, and then their job was to draw people together who were interested in that subject, and maybe to produce a newsletter and to meet at conferences and to encourage people in that specialty. One of the networks was the prayer network. And carrying on from the prayer walk that we did in Jerusalem, we started to have times when we went back to Israel in particular with a team and went throughout the land praying for different things. And we'd pray in movement, and this was a really significant and important time, both to have a feel for the land and to be able to pray at different things and for different things. And then we started to again continue that at conferences. So I remember when we had the conference in Ghana, we were able to go to a slave place where they sent off the slave ships from Ghana, and we had a very, very powerful time of intercession at that place. And then in India, we went round to all the local places. Gandhi was there at one particular point, and we had different things. There were a whole section where with the Hindu gods, and we were able to have prayers in movement and speaking them out as well. And so people who were interested in doing that would take an afternoon and follow along with that. So I think out of that has come prayer for the countries. So it's gone back to the individual countries. And I know that, for example, New Zealand just had a tour all around the North and the South Island, where they stopped in different places to pray in movement and words. We've had some wonderful moments together and some funny moments as well. One thing that I remember about the Jerusalem conference was when we crossed the Jordan and the direction was given that we had to walk along the theatre seats. So we had the whole conference, 70 people, walking across the seats of the theatre. And some people thought this was very strange. We had the most wonderful opening ceremony in Jerusalem, where the national flags were brought in and processed, and then the countries went up onto the stage, a representative, and there were candles lit for every country. And then we had a wonderful Israeli dance team that danced for us. So there are some amazing memories from that. And then I think of Scotland, and we were right next to the famous St Andrew golf course. So it was very beautiful and a lovely beach, and we spent one whole evening on the beach dancing and looking out to the sea and being very Celtic about everything. We had Andy Rain there, who's always got something interesting to do and say, and he led us to look out into the distance across the sea and to remember the early pioneers of the gospel, who brought the gospel to England and Ireland. And then at that conference, we've had some wonderful couples who've danced. And I remember Bill and Paula Douthit, and they always did a beautiful dance together. Very, very touching to see an older couple showing their affection and showing their love for the Lord together. And of course, Bill and Paula have done an amazing work in pioneering Christian dance movement, both in the United States, the UK, Europe, and right around the world. And it was very important at the beginning of the fellowship, that's the Australian fellowship, when Paula lent one of her dance group to come and live with me for a year and help start the fellowship there. And they've always been very supportive with coming to all the conferences and teaching. And then we've also got Marie and Andrew Bensley, who again have in the tradition as a couple who've used flags and led the flag network, banner network for a long time. And they danced for us this conference in a very touching way.
Thank you so much, Mary. You've really been such an encouragement to so many, and it's really a privilege to have had you part of our conference here in Sweden, and just join in with you, and we hope to see you at the next conference. God bless you.